Welcome to the GEM series, powered by Rocket Level. On this podcast, we empower entrepreneurs to succeed by setting big goals, executing like a pro, and having a fearless mindset. The GEM series is all about investing in yourself. We're here to share the path to getting what you want out of life by sharing the stories of entrepreneurs who have done this themselves, providing thorough research from our team on what careers and habits are yielding the best results, and discussing the mindset it takes to overcome the obstacles that all future entrepreneurs will face. Investing in yourself starts with putting in the work every single day, and this podcast is here to help you do exactly that. My name is Blake Chapman. I'm the Vice President of the Ambassador Program here at Rocket Level, and I am thrilled to be your host for the GEM series.
Today, I am pleased to welcome another incredible guest to the GEM series, Tiffany Yu. Just to give you all a tiny bit of background, Tiffany is an entrepreneur and disability rights advocate who founded Diversability, which is a social enterprise to advocate for equality for people with disabilities. She's also the founder of the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter. She's the host of the podcast Tiffany Yu and has been on multiple TED Talks in addition to doing so much more that I am totally thrilled to dive into. So Tiffany has personally inspired me and has shown how the path of being an entrepreneur can be rooted in what's actually important to you. Tiffany, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Blake?
I am doing great. And Tiffany, for those that don't know you, would you mind just sharing with the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm the daughter of an Asian immigrant, or a Taiwanese immigrant, my dad, and a refugee from the Vietnam War, my mom. I'm the youngest of four, and at the age of 9, I was involved in a car accident where my dad, who was driving, unfortunately passed away. I acquired a slew of injuries, including breaking a couple bones in one of my legs, permanently paralyzing one of my arms, and much later getting diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so all of those experiences growing up, now as someone with a disability, influence so much of the work that I do today. And so a big part of my why is that I felt so isolated and alone in my and excluded in my disability experience. And I started to notice that disabled people are one of the most socially isolated and excluded groups out there. And people forget that we need friends and we need community to thrive. And so that's actually what we've built. And we started as a community of one person at Diversability, just me going around campus hanging up flyers, to now a global a global digital ecosystem of more than 70,000 followers and supporters.
Well, first, obviously, to acknowledge the loss of your father, I'm incredibly sorry. And I think that what you've touched on is something that is so absolutely essential, in that you're totally right. I mean, whenever people are looking at other folks with disabilities, there is a tendency to look past and not prioritize inclusivity in the way that we should. And I just love your mission that you're on towards equitability and empowering so many people that are out there. So it's been really, really exciting the more I research, just seeing everything that you've done so far. I always love to learn, going back to sort of the beginning, what was your first passion before all of this, became what it was today? What it is today.
You mean my first passion before Diversability?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot about 9-year-old Tiffany in my work, and she loved being outside. She loved riding bikes and rock climbing. And the world was like her playground. And in my own personal journey, I've been over the last maybe like 5 or so years exploring the world of adaptive sports and finding, learning how to ride a bike again and going adaptive rock climbing and doing some of these things that I loved doing as a kid. So, I think maybe that was one of my passions. I also, when I was in high school, I ran for student government a lot. I think I ran maybe 5 or 6 times. I won once, but I love the idea of, I think those were the early stages of my community building. But it was more so like community building so that people realized that they could have a voice and they could be represented by someone like me or whoever the student government officers were.
Absolutely. And I see a common thread in all of that, and that all of it does have the potential to be centered in community. It's something in any sport that you do or anything like that. It's funny. You're going to get me off on a bad tangent because that's like one of my big obsessive things right now is rock climbing and bouldering and, and going into all that. So that's really cool. But I'll stay focused here. But I always love to hear what drove somebody in the early stages of life, and seeing how you're able to transition into your next phase of life. So once you were doing student government, whenever you were in college, though, what was the objective of getting the degree that you were going after right then and there? Was because I'd love to know, like, when you were able, because you're in the forest looking at the trees. When did you take the step back and go, oh my gosh, I think have you always had the vision of going after diversibility in this way, or?
No, yeah, I often call myself like an accidental entrepreneur, an accidental disability advocate, and an accidental community builder. And so I'll share two stories here. So I studied finance and accounting in college. And after I graduated, throughout college, was very focused on getting internships. I worked at a couple different banks. And then I did my final internship at a bank called Goldman Sachs in their investment banking division. Ultimately ended up going back to work at Goldman full time. And I was in different financial services roles until about 2016. So not only did I study finance and accounting for 4 years, I also spent 6 years kind of working in the field. So I'll often call that like the decade of, not only getting my degree, but utilizing it. But I also think that having an understanding, I've been thinking a lot about financial equity in my work and what I call disability-centered economic justice. And there's a goal of the Americans with Disabilities Act that is economic self-sufficiency, which is, do disabled people have enough money for their basic needs? And right now, the answer is no, even after over 30 years, or resoundingly no. Of course, disability is a spectrum, and all of us have different experiences. And so I actually think that now, because as I think through like where I'd like my advocacy to go in this next phase, I spent, since Diversability's founding in 2009 until now, very focused on building community. And I still think there's so much power there, just knowing you're not alone, but then like realizing how powerful you are as a collective, but then also unlearning some of the harmful things you may have internalized about what your external environment is telling you about your disabled body and or your disabled mind. But for this next phase, I'm just really focused on how can we bring more dollars back into the pockets and hands of the disability community, because that's really the biggest growth opportunity I see in the next little bit. So I think there is that little dotted line of working on Wall Street to then coming back full circle in a way of saying, I feel very privileged that right out of college, I was making 6 figures, and if we think about everything that's happening with student loan debt forgiveness right now, even just student loans in general, I know that there are so many things, so many financial factors that can weigh people down. And I feel really privileged that, my privilege, it just shows that wasn't something I had to think about right as I graduated from college. Moving into running Diversability full time, I was so scrappy. I was renting out my place on Airbnb. I was upselling furniture. I was being an extra in commercial, But yeah, I to come back to it.
Absolutely.
So that first story was, I studied finance and accounting, and I think it's coming back now. And I'm so grateful that is what I studied, because it really taught me how can I look at diversibility not only through the lens of advocacy, but a lot of advocacy pays $0. How can we actually create this as something financially sustainable that can not only support our team, but also make an impact? I think to answer your other question, which was, kind of like what happened in college. Now I'm starting to connect more of the dots, but when I was a freshman, from freshman year until junior year, a couple of my friends and I co-founded a Taiwanese American club on campus. And so we had been through the trials and tribulations of creating a community around an identity. And so come senior year, I hadn't really done that much work in the disability space, but I said, if I did this for my Taiwanese identity, I'm curious if people might be interested in something like this for a disability identity. And so that's kind of like where, like, I had the experience, but for a different part of my identity. And I became really curious about what that might look like for a part of my identity that just doesn't get that much visibility.
Absolutely. I think that that's so essential for people to realize is, everything that you go into and learn and no matter what you do is going to probably inform something in, in any mission that you take. I think a lot of times what's hard is maybe finding the end goal and staying true to that. And it sounds like, around this time, I'd be curious. So you're working at Goldman Sachs. Was there a moment where it clicked for you where you were like, I'm doing all of this, like, why don't I go do my own thing full time and support the mission that I believe in the most right now?
Yeah. The interesting backstory of me moving into Diversability full time was that I actually got fired. And I wasn't working at Goldman at the time. So I was working at a startup. In startup land, it can be very ruthless. Actually, in any land, probably now in the economic environment we're in. But
absolutely.
But interestingly enough, so while I was at Goldman, I got really involved in their disability employee resource group. So a lot of these big companies will have communities, which they call employee resource groups, or they might call them business resource groups or affinity groups. Yeah. And it's pretty much underrepresented identities, creating community, and being able to come together. So I was part of Goldman's Asian group for Asian employees. I was part of their women's group as well. I think I tried to show up for the LGBT group as an ally. And then they also had a budding disability group. And so I actually felt like, even though I had started Diversability at college and left it there, it was still a club at Georgetown at the time.
Yeah,
I was still having my disability cup full. And so after Goldman, I actually moved to Bloomberg. And interestingly enough, Bloomberg was in the beginning stages of creating all of their communities. And so I actually got to co-found and pitch to the chief diversity officer the creation of a disability employee resource group at Bloomberg. And so what ended up happening after there, so you'll kind of see a through line of, I'm still working in financial services in one way or another, but I'm still able to kind of like celebrate and connect with disability community in one way or another. And so interestingly enough, the company that I went to after Bloomberg was called Revolt. And it was co-founded by P. Diddy, so Black owned.
So cool.
Which is very amazing. Cool. I was still working in a finance role. So, a company that's all about hip hop and music and millennial and media. But I'm still in finance. So I remind people that I was probably like the least cool person there. But but while I was there,
I doubt that.
They really prioritized racial diversity in terms of having a lot of Black employees. And then I also noticed there were a lot of women there. I mean, it was also a media company. So maybe in the media world, there was better representation. But the company was too small for any of these communities. And so I started to get really curious about how I could continue to stay plugged in with the disability community. And interestingly enough, there was someone named Liz Taub who was really active on LinkedIn and had, a senior position at a nonprofit that's now known as Disability In. So I met with her for coffee. Again, this is through a Twitter message. And I said, hey, here's something that I did in college. I've been actively involved in the disability communities at my past corporate companies, but now I'm working at a startup that doesn't have these communities, and I want to figure out how to get involved. And she was really encouraging in terms of being like, Tiffany, the work that we do at Disability In is mainly on the business level. So we're mainly working with corporates on their policies and their strategies. But what you built at Georgetown, I could see a place for it in New York City. And she's like, effectively, what you're trying to do is like a meetup for disabled people. And, our friends and allies can join us as well. So she actually became our first supporter. And while I was at Revolt, I actually relaunched Diversability as a side project, as a passion project, while I was still working full time. Then I ended up moving to another startup, got fired. And then I said, in between, finding my next role, I'm going to see if I can make this Diversability thing work. And that was March of 2017.
Oh my goodness. I love how in a career path, it is just a bunny trail where it's never linear. It's always everything it can work out for a reason, as somebody who, did the corporate path and, I got fired from my job too. And I was like, oh my goodness, what do I do? And then you sit down, you get a second to focus on what are your priorities, and then move forward into something that, opens up or is, exactly what you're looking for. And it's interesting, all those little intersections of meeting the right person and listening to like what is true for yourself and how that can guide you to, the next logical step, and how powerful intuition is in that. Along the way. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I think there are like two big lessons in kind of what you reflected back to me. And one is, and this is often advice that I give to younger people, is that it's okay to change your mind. Like, I thought I was going to be in investment banking for my whole career, and the lifestyle wasn't sustainable for me. And as I looked at the people who were more senior to me, I didn't exactly want their jobs or their lifestyles. They were still working the same hours I was, and traveling all the time. So number one is okay to change your mind. And then number two, you shared that experience of getting fired. In the moment, I think just sitting in that grief and that hurt, and sometimes it might be shame, is totally fine, right? I think it makes sense in retrospect, but when it happens, it really sucks. So I don't want to diminish how hard that experience is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's also just as a bouncing off of what you just said there. I realized that it is extremely essential. I was listening to some of your videos, and I listened to one about toxic positivity and the impact that has. I mean, how did you learn about that? I mean, for me, when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, because the video was a few years ago, but I was like, that is still something that, actively impacts me, impacts, people in my community. And that's something I've been having to unlearn, just to be vulnerable and real about that. I mean, it's something to unlearn, especially when we have a public platform like this.
Yeah. I'll share two anecdotes to that. The first is, I have this anti-ableism series on TikTok and Instagram. And one of the phrases that I made, and so the series is like really bite-sized ways about how to be a better ally. And I think there are like 197 as of this recording. So there's a lot. And I also want to highlight, there's no one way, because oftentimes I'll come onto these podcasts and they're like, okay, so how can we be an ally? And I'm like, I have 197 ways.
That's out there. That's available.
But one of the parts of the series was around the phrase when people say, don't let your disability stop you. And after I shared that, I had someone come to me and they said, well, Tiffany, what can we say instead? Because when someone with a disability or any experience is going through a hard time, I want to say something like motivating or encouraging to them. And I went back to them and I said, what you could ask is, what kind of support do you need right now? And that's kind of like a pattern interrupt, right? Because we're so used to being like, oh, but it could be worse, or it could get better, or like it's going to get better. You just got to change your mindset. But the thing is like, when you're in it, it's really hard, because honestly, and you watch this talk, like that talk was really about how to experience the most out of life, you need to sit, whether it's in the depths of your grief, in order to know what extreme gratitude looks like, right? You need to sit in spaces of extreme sadness to know what unconditional joy looks like. And And so, yeah, I mean, even I'm trying to work on pattern interrupting you could even just, and I think I even have a couple suggestions in that talk too, which are like, I'm listening. You could even say, I don't know what to say right now, but let me know what kind of response you're looking for, because sometimes people will want encouraging words. And other times they are just looking for someone to listen. But that leads into the second thing, which is I gave that talk, I think, I was going to say at the midway point of the pandemic, but we're still in it. But one of the things I noticed in the early days of the pandemic was that there were so many positive messages going around that started to feel kind of toxic, because what I will describe the last couple of years that we've been through, I mean, most of us, the majority of us have been through extreme periods of social isolation. A lot of us have gotten COVID and have experienced what that is like. And then there have been periods of social unrest, not only around, COVID safety protocols in the disability community, but also Black Lives Matter, anti-Asian violence. And so we've been through collective grief and trauma. And so to relay messages that things are great, just felt really dissonant with what was going on. And so that actually became the inspiration for the talk. And the inspiration was, we're in a pandemic right now. There's a reason why it's called a pandemic and not a vacation. And so the messages I'm getting are like vacation messages, like have a great time. But it's hard. And so how can we acknowledge the hard moments as well? But all of that to say, I think I just want to remind our listeners that, that whole talk was about toxic positivity, but I think genuine and authentic positivity is great. But also remember that everything exists on a spectrum and on a band. And so if we have lots of positivity, there's going to be some negativity, and that's okay too, right? It's just how we experience the fullest, how we experience life the fullest.
Yeah, no, and I think that is, it's funny. It comes back to a fundamental truth of just try to listen. I mean, it's a skill to develop, but listening to yourself so that you can actually experience what you're truly experiencing and be real, to put it simply. And, sometimes what I think about too is entrepreneurs that are out there that are vocalizing these kinds of messages. And I wonder, maybe what would be some redirects for people, because I love your series so much of like, hey, if you're looking to make an impact, maybe I know one redirect that you just shared was challenging people to
like what kind of support do you need?
What kind of support do you need? Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's something that people should take the time to start and consider whenever they're trying to figure out what kind of messaging that they should put out there. Yeah. Now that you're at this stage, what kind of impact do you anticipate making now that you've gotten to work with so many great people and gotten to be in this industry for so long now?
Yeah. I think I'll come back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about disability-centered economic justice or financial equity. And I see that happening in a couple different ways. You mentioned it in my intro. So in addition to Diversability, I also run a micro grant called the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, which awards $1,000 monthly micro grants to disability projects every month. And we've awarded over 65 in 10 different countries, over $65,000 too, which is amazing. Wow. And I will say, I remember launching that alongside another disability advocate, Alice Wong, in 2017. And so many people, I'll talk a little bit of the naysayers. And I've had both naysayers for Diversability. And when we launched the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, they were like, we don't think this chapters like this don't exist for longer than a year or a year and a half. And now we just started our 5th year in July. And hopefully we're not going anywhere. We made it through a pandemic, when finances were very tight for a lot of us as we were trying to figure out how to pivot. So economic economic justice. So that was kind of like the first initiative in that space where I wanted to make an impact. And then more recently, I launched something called the Disability Empowerment Endowed Fund, which sat at Georgetown University, but it's an endowment fund, which means that it will continue to make distributions in perpetuity. And come 2023, the endowment fund will be fully funded. So we needed to raise $100,000 for it to be created. So I came up with the idea. I made a large kind of seed donation, but we crowdfunded the rest. And we got, thanks to everyone rallying together. I wanted to show this is the power of our community. But I wanted to create this endowment fund because not only did I want to show that disability is important and needs to be a priority, but we need to be putting dollars behind it as well. So that was kind of like second. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's like literally putting our money where our mouth is and saying, hey, we're going to financially support people because guess what? We live in a world where we have to, that's how people get the resources that they need,
And oftentimes I talk about, a lot of people will talk about anti-capitalism or post-capitalistic worlds. And I think that we get too caught up in moving in that direction that we forget that we're still existing in a capitalistic society, unfortunately. Because of that, we need money to live.
Absolutely.
So that kind of feeds into like my third initiative in this space, which is, when I started Diversability, it was a club and community of one person in 2009. At Georgetown, I think we grew our listserv to about 400, which is pretty good on campus. I ended up relaunching Diversability in 2015 as a passion project on the side. Moved into it in 2017. And from 2017 until 2020, we were very scrappy. I couldn't figure out how we were going to become sustainable. And we kind of danced between having one or two other team members. So we were a team of like 1 to 3. Now we have a team of 10. Everyone is paid. We also host monthly events. All of our speakers are paid as well. I think I'm just trying to combat this idea of no free labor in the disability community. There will be some things that you're super passionate about that you're willing to do or take into account, a corporate budget versus a nonprofit budget and adjust accordingly. But I think for me, this is the kind of impact I want to make, right? So not only are we providing people with valuable skills and job experience, I hope. We also serve as their references. And we've kind of seen this model work over the last couple of years of someone will be with us for, a period of time, and then they want to apply for something else and we'll serve as their job reference or we'll write them a letter of recommendation. And then they get it. And that's a big win for me, right? That's how we keep this ecosystem healthy and working. So I think it's really looking at, I feel very, very privileged with, I feel very privileged even though, you can look at me and my story and there are parts of it that are tragic. I did grow up in a single parent, because my dad passed away. I grew up in a single parent home. And my mom in many ways is really the hero of this story of working really, really hard. I mean, I've never seen a human being work so hard to support 4 children through all of our education and make sure that we are taken care of in one way or another. And so how can I pay that forward to my community as well? So I heard someone, there's someone I really admire named Arlen Hamilton. Arlen is the founder of Backstage Capital. And she says, when she talks about money, she says, how can I make sure that I take care of me first, and then my family, and then my community? And I think that's a really great way to think about it too. So interestingly enough, like at the beginning of the pandemic, we applied for, I think it was like entrepreneur unemployment benefits, like Diversability. We hadn't figured out how to make it work. It was just me and one other team member, who were kind of like, we were just trying to figure out how it would work. to now being able to support 10 people. And I hope that, as the economy changes, we can continue to ride that as well and continue to support our team.
I think that that's absolutely wonderful. I always wonder about that perspective because I talk to a lot of folks I like that you talked about also the post-capitalism ideas where I am constantly interested in a better formula for how to do life, right? And for everybody to be supported in a better way, But I do think that in order for us to unwork some of this, we have to get to a point where we're like, hey, how do I as an individual reach out and make somebody else's lives better? And I love what you said. You have to, 1, be able to sustain yourself, 2, sustain your family, and then 3, it's the people that are at arm's length. And I think you're doing such a great job of being able to welcome in, 1, people building your staff, but then 2, I mean, it's so community based, being able to have a system where referrals can come in and then you're like, hey, my friend vouched for you. I love them. I would love to bring you in as well. I think that's really, really neat, that model. Do you anticipate continuing to also, actually, before I get ahead of myself, you mentioned naysayers as well in the beginning of this. When you were starting to do all of this, were you getting any kind of feedback like that in the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, I share some version of this story, but there were points in the early days where there just wasn't excitement about Diversability for it to exist. And so I share this story of, I came up with this idea. And I think it was probably like August or September of 2009. And I reached out to 2 other disabled students that I knew of at Georgetown, saying, hey, I'm thinking of starting this club. What do you think? And, whether it was email overwhelm or email fatigue, I just didn't hear from them. But silence can also be an answer in itself. And so I didn't, at that time, I hadn't received any peer support yet. And so I reached out to a couple administrators that I knew. So my senior year, I was a resident assistant. So I was interacting a lot with the Georgetown staff. And I told my manager of the resident assistants that I wanted to start this club. And he's like, oh, there's someone that you should chat with who, is his peer counterpart on the staff who's really passionate about disability studies. So I had a conversation with her and she's like, Tiffany, as much as I am passionate about this space and, she had studied it in her education, she was like, I don't think Georgetown is ready for something like this. And it was kind of like those couple of touch points that informed me tabling the idea. So keep in mind, it's August, September, and in October, I got invited to speak on a panel around disability advocacy on campus. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't even a disability advocate. I just was a student who happened to have a disability. So I spoke on this panel, and the panel brought together all DC area schools. So we had, American, George Washington University, Gallaudet. And at the end of the panel, I said, I had this idea to start a club on Georgetown's campus around a disability identity, but I reached out to a couple people and no one seems interested. And all of a sudden, the people at this mini conference / event were like, I'll be part of your club. So it wasn't even students at Georgetown. It was a couple professors from Georgetown and then another student who didn't even go, a couple students and people who didn't even go to Georgetown ended up becoming our first supporters, Wow. And I think that I think there's part of this whole journey that was a little stubborn. But it was more so to say, this is something that I so desperately need. And it is fascinating to me that no one cares or thinks that the world is ready for this. And in the early days of Diversability, people would tell me that my ideas were radical. And now I actually take that as a compliment.
Yes, but it's forward thinking.
Yeah, but in the early days, Diversability, so this is 2009, and you can actually go online and find we applied for a grant, a $500. We applied for a grant to just get some money for this club to get off the ground. And in our grant proposal, which you can find online, it says, I'm looking to start a movement around disability pride. When I went to go interview for the grant, again, Diversability hadn't been formed yet, still super early stages, no supporters yet. I went before the grant committee and they said, why do you think people are going to care about this? Like they outwardly asked me that question. And then they said, I don't really understand the concept of disability pride because I don't understand how someone can be proud to be disabled. Right. And I think it's so fascinating. In 2015, New York City declared July as Disability Pride Month, complete with the Disability Pride Parade. In 2022, more cities, even the White House, said Happy Disability Pride Month. It's a thing. Disability pride is a concept in and of itself, but so this is actually part of why I have appreciated being in this space for this long, because I actually have seen progress. And I think it can be easy to come in and say, this isn't the right time for this, or I don't see a space for this. But I think I want to transition our community from very much, and I said in these spaces, scarcity and lack spaces, because a disability can sometimes be seen as lack. But there's a lot more movement around seeing things instead of loss in terms of gain or abundance, right? Or that there's space and opportunity for everyone. So sometimes I joke that I feel like I was before my time, but we're still around, and we actually went through a rebranding. I think, we went through a rebranding a year ago, and we were going back and forth in terms of what our tagline was going to be. And we were like, do we want it to be, because originally it was amplifying disabled voices. And we ended up with elevating disability pride. So the same exact thing that we started with in 2009. And part of the reason why I chose that is, yes, we can amplify disabled voices, or we can raise disability awareness, but you can still be aware of disability and think that we are subhuman, think that we don't deserve economic self-sufficiency, think that we don't deserve to get married or have a job, but disability pride is like, I'm here in spite of all of you saying all of this stuff, and I'm proud and I like myself. And that is a radical act.
Absolutely.
And so that's why we kind of like these are kind of the things that go into thinking about how language has the power to empower or disempower communities.
I just got chills thinking about how motivated you've been to, follow through this mission. I always am curious whenever I hear people that are driven like this, what's the mindset that made you, even after your first, when everything was, you've heard silence after sending out your initial emails. And then you said, you know what, I'm going to get in front of some more people. What was the mindset that you think kept driving you forward through all of that?
Yeah. So one thing I'm really proud of, so I guess I'll share, you have kind of like your visionaries, and then you have your your doers. And I'm a doer. And so cool. I don't think I necessarily had very clear foresight into what the vision was, but I knew how to do things. And so for me, it was like, if it's just an email, or if it's just a meeting, this is one more step that I can take. I will say in 2015, when we were looking at relaunching Diversability, now incorporating as an LLC, like coming out of a campus environment, I told myself, I'm going to organize one event. And if no one shows up, then there is not a need for this. And now, now we're in 2022. So that was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
In 2022, we're now hosting virtual events. And we have, in our last couple of virtual events, we've had over 100, 200, 300 people RSVP'd for them. And the topics were all different. We did one on financial equity. There was one on digital accessibility. But people still are thirsty for this type of conversation, and our launch event sold out. For us, sold out was 70 tickets sold. And I think that helped cover the venue registration and some food and a couple other things. But people showed up. And so, yes, I think in the early days, I think for me, it was that panel that I spoke at. And actually, I remember the day because October 22nd, 2009 was the day of that event. But it was also the first time I had ever been invited to speak publicly about my disability origin story. I had never told anyone about it before publicly. And then when I did, it was either like whispers because it was a secret, or, I got very emotional because there was still a lot of pain. So
absolutely.
I think I maybe told myself, through all of those, because it also happened in a short period of time where it was like August or September that email was sent and this event was in October. I think I told myself at the October thing, if I made that statement that I wanted to start this club and no one was interested, and it kind of just ended there, then I think I probably wouldn't have moved forward with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But finally, I guess it's like the 3 counts. You had the email, no one responded. You had the meeting, didn't get the response I wanted. And the third time's a charm. People were so enthusiastic about the possibility of what we could create.
Wow. It seemed like from there, there's some pretty incredible momentum in terms of just thinking about that being when you first dove into public speaking. Did you have a pretty big history with public speaking in the past before that?
No. Yeah, I think it's, so my last year at Goldman, I actually was a recruiter. And part of why I wanted to be a recruiter was I actually wanted to get better at public speaking. And as a recruiter, you're like giving presentations all the time. You're speaking with prospective students.
Yes.
You're literally like, your job is like talking and selling. And so interestingly enough, so after and I didn't share this about my time at Bloomberg, but after my time being a recruiter at Goldman, I actually got a job as a production assistant at Bloomberg Television. So
what have you not done?
I know. But the through line was I could leverage my time working at a bank to a journalism media company that was covering financial news. So I knew the subject matter, but I didn't know like how to tell a story effectively. But I kind of look at all of these moments as like little skills in my toolkit so now when I was at Bloomberg Television, I was like, I'm a production assistant. I'd love to work my way up to maybe doing some on-camera stuff, And so ultimately what I learned from that, so I did end up getting promoted to becoming like a segment producer and writer, but I realized that most journalists are reporting on other people's stories. And I thought, I feel like I want to be someone who's making the news and not someone who's just asking about it. But that experience taught me, and I have my own podcast too, like how to ask better questions, right? So I think that there are skills just gained through every single one of these. And after my time at Bloomberg, I ended up going back in-house to Revolt. And at the time I thought, wow, like, this company it's celebrity owned. It's really on the cutting edge of trying to bring music and millennials like represented on the big screen and little screen everywhere. And I loved what we were building, but yeah, my exit out of Revolt, I actually, and this is a random thing that happened, but I ended up winning a scholarship to learn how to code. I know. And it was in Amsterdam. So I had been self-taught. I made a website in high school, and it was all self-taught or just like copying code from one place to another. And I started to learn, like, again, Revolt is also when I relaunched Diversability. So while I was still working at this great music startup, I was running these Diversability events. And one of the events that I got to attend was, it was like a partnership between AT&T and NYU called the Connectability Challenge. And they were looking for tech-enabled solutions around solving different things related to the disability experience. And that's when I realized just like how important tech was. And then I was like, well, maybe I should like learn how to build things.
Yeah.
So I applied for this. Yeah, I applied for the scholarship. And the cool thing was that the scholarship was in Amsterdam, and I had never been to Europe before. So here was a combination of kind of like personal and professional coming into play, which is here's a city and a country and a continent I've never been to before, plus learning something that I think will benefit me potentially in my disability advocacy journey. So I said yes, but because I said yes, I had to resign from Revolt, and they were super supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another lesson I learned is that like, don't burn any bridges.
Yes.
I'm still in touch with all of my I'm still in touch with my former manager. We're on good terms. You know, if I pass through New York, I'll see if they have time to meet up. And the whole way I actually got my job at Revolt was someone I used to work with at Goldman was an investor in Revolt and saw that I had transitioned to Bloomberg Television. So I made the transition from healthcare banking to media. And he's like, oh, Tiffany, given your interest in media and that you have the finance background, do you want to come back and do finance in a media company? So that's how that came to be. So
that's really incredible. And I love getting to learn about anybody's toolkit that has given them the skills to be able to do what they need to do today, you know, or the thing that they love the most. I know for me, I'm a little bit of I've always been like a little bit of a jack of all trades. And usually for me, that means being able to, I started off and I was like, okay, I'll get a sociology degree. Not exactly sure what's going on. Go into, tech, go into, sales, go into marketing, go into the restaurant industry. And now I'm getting to just, do what I love the most, which is talk to people and, come from a background of working in several different industries, getting to learn, about people that I learn about people's stories and try to make connections where I can and do anything I possibly can to see other people grow and meet other people. So it's pretty exciting.
All right, Tiffany. We just experienced the virtual world, internet droppage and all kinds of stuff. I always like it though, because I think it's fun. It's like a fun new way to experience, just communication and making it happen and problem solving and building things together. It's kind of fun. So
yeah, I mean, I remember the days where most podcasts were recorded in person. And then I think with the emergence of Zoom and realizing that we could have virtual conversations, like we started seeing all of these podcast platforms explode, right? But yeah, for those who are interested, I had an internet outage. So I had to switch devices.
Hey, and you stayed agile. It's great. I'm like, look at that. We're right back. We're right back on it. I've had the same thing happen to me countless times over. Tiffany, I've loved getting to learn about your story and everything so far. I wanted to ask a few kind of closing out questions that I was thinking of, and one of them was, what are some of the challenges that you'd extend to some others that want to start a company in an equitable and impactful way?
I would say, I think one thing I appreciate about my own entrepreneurial journey is that I'm a beneficiary of what I've created. And so I think that if you're working on solving a problem that you understand so intimately, that will shine through in whatever you're building. I think the other thing I'll say is, I think asking who's missing is good to take that critical lens of our own work sometimes, and really think about whose perspectives are not being incorporated here, and is there an avenue or a way that we can help course correct or change that?
Absolutely. I think that's such a great way that you phrased that too, because one thing that we don't consider is that with all of these unique perspectives out there, if they're not a part of your company, then that means that there's
they're not being represented. And that means that you aren't, taking everything that you should into consideration with what you're doing in the world. And I feel like that can leave yourself vulnerable to a position where you are enabling racism and ableism and everything, because you're saying, hey, our vision that we're putting out there into the world isn't taking into consideration everybody's, and we're not taking steps to ready that or to prepare for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also important for us to turn inward and take a critical lens in the ways that we are complicit in upholding a lot of these systems of oppression as well. I recently learned about something from Michelle Kim called hidden stories. And a good example of a hidden story is when I walk down the street as an Asian woman, I'm afraid of getting attacked by someone who does not like people who look like me. While someone who's a Black man, when they walk down the street, may be afraid of being interrogated by police. And so here you have two experiences, one of which I don't share, but how can I also understand that that story also exists?
Yeah, and I think that is that's something that I was reading about a little bit before we hopped on here too, is the ability to take into consideration a more intersectional perspective. What are, I guess, some ways that people can incorporate intersectionality into, or even how you've incorporated intersectionality into the way that you live your life and build community and do what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think I come back to this question of the who's missing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But also I think that, so there's like a 2 to 3 minute video that you can watch from Microsoft Enable called like, what is disability intersectionality? And that's a question that I've gotten asked myself from people who don't share my race or don't share my gender, but share my disability status. And so disability intersectionality is the way in which our lived experience of disability is impacted by our other identities. So a good example of that could be for me, because I'm the daughter of Asian immigrants and shame is viewed in the context of the family, it was instilled in me to not tell anyone about my disability and not draw any attention to it. I mean, I've definitely done something very different in the work that I've done, but yeah, I think it's just again, taking a critical lens at what are the aspects of diversity that we can see? What are the aspects of diversity that we can't see? Who's missing? And is there a way that we can intentionally bring that perspective into our spaces, while also making sure it's not performative or not tokenizing?
Sure.
Making sure you're compensating them for their time and other things like that.
Absolutely. And the last thing that I always ask as well is, it's a two-parter. What is your favorite thing about what you do? And finally, are there any myths that you would want to dispel about being an entrepreneur?
Okay, so the first one, what's my favorite thing about what I do? I guess I feel really proud that I'm using whatever power and privilege I can to move this space forward. So I also understand that I am not single-handedly going to dismantle the system of oppression that is ableism. But one person's perspective can be changed by, you watched a couple of my TED Talks, or by having someone join our community and realize that they're not alone, or having someone join our team and realize that their skills are valuable. So yeah, I think for me, my favorite thing is just seeing, or actually I'll change my answer. My favorite thing about what I do is because I have been doing this for 13 years now. It's being able to see how people in our community have grown and found their own voices in this advocacy space, have written books, have become TEDx speakers. Because the definition of community that I use is when a group of people come together to nurture their own growth and each other's growth. And so for me, so much of what I wanted to build with this community was focused on growth. Like, how can I help you in your own personal growth journey? And how can we all grow together as a movement? And then to answer your second question around myths around entrepreneurship, I would say it's easier and harder than you think it is, which I know isn't helpful. But I think the myth is that we think that entrepreneurship needs to look a certain way, and that an entrepreneur needs to be venture backed, or needs to be a TEDx speaker, or needs to be featured in XYZ press. But I would challenge, again, I would encourage us to take a critical lens in terms of all the ways that entrepreneurship can look. And so I've recently been using the phrase creative entrepreneurship because, and I mentioned her earlier, Arlen Hamilton, not only did she talk about making money to support yourself and your family and your community, but she also talked about having multiple streams of income. And so she's a venture capitalist, but also a startup founder and also a speaker, and, she has a whole masterclass on diversifying your streams of income. And I think one of my own myths that I had to unlearn was that I felt like in order to be an entrepreneur, I only needed to be doing my one entrepreneurial venture, and that's where all of my income was going to come from. But especially in the early days, and even now, as our team is growing and we're still trying to think through financial sustainability, I've gotten really creative about different ways that I'm able to support myself economically, to then support my family, to then support my community.
I think that is so essential for people to learn, as well as that there are multiple ways that you can, get yourself out there and be able to achieve what you're looking for. Something that I heard recently was, the thing that you want to be able to, stay true to is the ultimate end goal, or whatever that is. And then in between that, there's probably little, the strategy is going to vary and always change up. Tiffany, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to meet you. I just was loving getting to absorb your story. I know our audience is going to love getting to learn everything about you if they have not already heard about you. It's been an honor having you on the podcast. Is there anywhere that people can keep up with you, and anything additional that you'd like to share with the audience about ways that they might be able to support what you're doing right now?
Sure. Yeah. So you can learn about me. I have a website, tiffanyyu.com. All of my social links are there if you want to follow me across any of the social channels. And if you're looking to get more involved in Diversability and support what we're doing there, we also have a website, mydiversibility.com, and we've got all of our social channels linked there. There's a lot of really great educational content that we're putting out at Diversability. We host events every single month. We also now have a membership community called the Diversability Leadership Collective. If you'd like to sponsor a membership for someone, you can always do that too. But there are there are so many different ways to get involved. Like, we have a free community as well that sits on Facebook that non-disabled allies are welcome to join. So yeah, I would say if you enjoyed this conversation, you can follow me. But if you want to be part of this broader disability movement and community that we're building, you're welcome to join and check out Diversability as well.
Tiffany, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Everybody, I hope everybody listening has a wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the GEM series, the podcast for anybody dedicated to investing in themselves. If you would like to see the resources mentioned in this episode, learn more about what we are up to at Rocket Level, or come over and join our team, just click on the links below. Until next time, this is Blake Chapman, and remember to be awesome and do awesome things.